community in America before, and you have such a mixed masjid as well. And you know, alhamdulillah, since becoming Muslim just 2 years ago, gosh, a lot's happened since then, alhamdulillah, I always have a feeling that the masjids where people from different groups all gather together have such a good barakah in them, because this is the face of Islam. Not one tribe in one village, but all the world together. So mashallah, it's lovely to be here in that environment this evening. I'm in the USA on this visit for the Muslim Legal Fund of America, and I've just got back from Gaza. Inshallah, I'll talk to you about Gaza during my talk in a little while. But the reason I come every month to America for the Muslim Legal Fund is because actually you are also on the front line of the rights of the Ummah right now. You and your children know the climate that is current in America and the difficulties that you face. And the sisters, maybe you have some persecution wearing the hijab. This may just be the form of pressure in your heart putting it on. This may be difficulties in your daughters saying, I don't want to be different from everyone else, or it may be more severe. Allahu Alam. But the difficulties that the Muslim Legal Fund wishes to defend on your behalf are the most severe. This is because there is a movement within certain parts of the American government that is not interested in civil rights as it should be. That it is choosing political cases amongst our community, our Ummah in America, that mean that in every masjid, virtually in every city in America, men, students, breadwinners are being taken and accused of heinous crimes that very often either they have been entrapped into talking about, or they have nothing to do with at all, as in the case of the Holy Land Foundation. Now, the Muslim Legal Fund of America is not interested in representing people who actually have done something wrong. Those are for different legal teams. The Muslim Legal Fund takes on the cases where there is absolutely no clear evidence of any wrongdoing whatsoever against the men involved. In fact, we study the men and the young men who are being accused, whether it's an immigration case or these very serious terror accusations, material support accusations, and we study what the people around them say. This is a great student. He was going to be a doctor. This is an imam. He's been a pillar of our community for 40 years. There is no way that what's being painted about this person can possibly be true. And these are the cases we want to represent. Now, if you remember in the 1950s and 60s, the Black Civil Rights Movement, they didn't just sit down in their churches and say, you know what? The government and the majority in this country are going to look after us, it's going to be okay. Because they knew after 200 years it wasn't going to be okay unless they stood together and mounted cases that represented their people. Now, the Muslim Legal Fund raises money to do just this, and on top of that, we have our duty, above all of that, we have our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to let our brothers be neglected by our communities. There are many hundreds of American Muslims in prison tonight with their families who miss them because they have not been able to have representation from people like the Muslim Legal Fund of America. We have a duty to look after one another, and inshallah we will do that tonight. And I will hand back now to our brother here, Abdullah, but in a little while I will be back and inshallah I will share with you my own journey to Islam. I hope you will be generous with the Muslim Legal Fund. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
She is a journalist, she's a writer. She's going to be sharing with you, brothers and sisters, her story of why and how she came into Islam. And it is truly a heartwarming and really a true story of the Sahaba, meaning that how they accepted Islam. They didn't. We are told usually that Islam was spread by the sword. No, it was spread through the characteristics. And inshallah, Sister Lauren Booth, she will be sharing her story of she came into the fold of Islam and the struggles that she has been fighting throughout this time. Jazakallah khairan, Sister Lauren Booth.
Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Kullu wallahu ahad. Allahu samad. Lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
I grew up in the United Kingdom in the 1970s, and it wasn't a time of integration. So although that there was always a large Pakistani community in the United Kingdom, they were them and we the white people, we were us. So I want to explain to you my own humble journey as to how I come to be standing here in this lovely abaya from Egypt, which I just got, alhamdulillah, and modestly covered and humbled and proud to call myself your sister in Islam. This is a miracle because I'm telling you 2.5 years ago, I was not going to be Muslim. 2.5 years ago, if I had walked into this masjid and seen me here standing like this, I would have said something like, "What did they do to you?" Or maybe, "No way." Because I was a happy sinner. When you come to Islam in the West, especially if you are what's known as a public figure, the media wants to paint you in one of two ways. Either as someone who was already unhappy and had failed in life, and therefore, because of a weak mind, came to religion, or somebody who's had some kind of nervous breakdown. I don't mock this, I completely understand where they're coming from. You see, I worked for the mainstream media. And if you do not engage in the debate about the existence of God at all, what other explanation is there for people who believe in God? So I understand their narrative. I'm just now on the other side. So I grew up in the 1970s in London, and my father is an actor, Anthony Booth, and my mother was a model. And in our household, there wasn't really any faith. My father had lost belief in the Catholic Church. And my mother, well, she was just superstitious. She would never go to church, but she would hang crosses around the house to ward off evil spirits. But what is interesting to note is that I do remember being 5 years old and praying. It didn't seem to me, in my memory, that anyone had to explain that God existed, because I felt God in my heart as a child. I knew that above my parents' mistakes and my grandparents' squabbling, that there was an order that was making sense, and it was God who was running everything. And so I remember putting my hands together as a little girl and making the most sincere prayers of my life. I put my hands together, I remember, and I used to pray like this: "Dear God, please take my younger sister away. She's horrible." I told that to my eldest daughter, Alex, the other day. She went, "Wow, that's the prayer I make too." I said, "Don't say that about your younger sister." Alhamdulillah. Allah loved my younger sister too, and she's still with us. But growing up as a natural believer in God in Western secular society is really difficult. Everything in this society is made to take us away from the knowledge of the unseen, away from humility, away from questioning why we exist. So guess what happened to me? When I was around 10 years old, I started to have friends come over on a sleepover from school. And I remember one night, I was 10, 11 years old, putting my hands together, and a friend from school was there, and I said, "Dear God," she looked at me and went, you know that noise that teenage girls make, mocking you. "Why, what are you doing?" I said, I'm praying to God. She said, God who? She said, is God the one with the beard on the cloud? And I didn't know how to describe God. I didn't have enough of an image of him. No one had talked to me or helped my heart to grow in taqwa. And I felt stupid. And almost overnight I stopped praying. And then what happens is the natural disaster of the hormones and the ego. They come in 11, 12 years old, and you are master of the universe. I remember my mother saying to me, you really do think the sun goes round you, don't you? And I did, for a very long time. By the age of 14, I was smoking drugs on the way to school. By 15, I was dating. By 17, I was regularly drunk. Not that this was unusual, this was the norm. And God became a figure in the corner of the universe, and I didn't have much to do with him, and as far as I could see, he didn't have much to do with me. And what did I know about Islam growing up in the West? Well, as I said, the 1970s wasn't a good time for, can we say, liberal accepting ethics. There were about 3 Muslim girls in my year at school. And they were in their Muslim group, and we were in the white girl gang. But I watched them, and I tried from watching them to make an image of what Islam meant. And over 6 years, I drew 3 conclusions, maybe 4, that would last me up until the year 2000. Conclusion number 1. I thought that Islam forced girls to grow long black hair because they all had lovely hair. Number 2, I didn't understand how, but somehow Islam made girls very good at maths, because all the girls that I met who were Muslim were in the top class at maths, and they were all going to become doctors. And number 3, I was sure up until 9/11 that Islam came from Pakistan. You see, there's a lot of work to do with dawah in the West. Alhamdulillah, when Allah has a plan for you, you can go to the left or the right of that plan, but you will reach his destination. In 2000, something happened to me that would awaken a course of events in my life that I had no control over, and I still feel no control over to this day. And I say Alhamdulillah, and I acknowledge God's place in that and his control over all things. What people want to know when you're a revert to Islam is, what is the moment when you felt your heart begin to change? What is the second when something came into you and you realized the world wasn't as you'd seen it before? I know what that moment is, and I'll share it with you now. I was sitting in my living room, and I had a 1-month-old daughter. Her name is Alexandra. This is in December 2000. And on my TV screen, I was watching the evening news, probably half asleep from feeding my daughter, but an image came onto the screen, and it took the breath out of my chest and dried my throat and brought tears to my eyes instantly. And the image was of the back of a young man. He had jeans on and he had a t-shirt on. But what was extraordinary about the young man was what he was holding in his right hand. He was holding a stone. And he was about to throw that stone. And what was incredible to me sitting at home in London was the strength of that boy. Because in front of him, just a few feet away, was an Israeli tank. And it was pointing its gun at him, and it was as if he had no fear at all. Now that boy's name was Faris Odeh. And Faris Odeh came from a place I'd never heard of called the Gaza Strip. And he came from a refugee camp I'd never heard of called Rafah. And I'd like you all to hold the name Rafah in your minds, because it'll come again later. As I sat there, watching Faris Ode, from the comfort of my home, throw his stone or be about to throw his stone, I realized that the people in the tank were more afraid of the stone than the boy was of the missile and the tank. And my heart began to change in a way I couldn't understand. I didn't know it, but 9 days after I saw that picture, Faris Ode, the 15-year-old boy with the stone, was shot dead by an Israeli sniper, and he bled to death on the floor of his refugee camp. Now, when Allah has a plan for you, you will go to the left or the right. The only choice is how much you struggle with His plan, because you will go to His destination. 5 years later, in 2005, I cannot explain to you why. Wallahi, I have no idea why. But I walked into my editor's office at a very big newspaper called the Mail on Sunday, and I heard myself, as if having an out-of-body experience, say the words, "Peter, I want to go to Palestine and cover the elections." Now, I need you to understand who I was at this point. In 2005, I had a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter. I was a successful journalist. I had a photo byline. A photo byline means you've got a whole page to yourself, you've got your picture at the top. It's a bit like being a Hollywood star of newspapers. I'd never written anything about the Middle East. I'd never had any training in being a war correspondent, and I really had a bit of a nerve asking to go to Palestine. But my editor said, "Go for 2 weeks, Lauren. Cover the elections. Here's some money. We'll give you 4 pages of the magazine." Now, a few days later, I found myself outside Tel Aviv airport, wondering what on earth I was doing there. I had 3 Arab names on a bit of paper that would apparently get me an interview with the man who was about to become the leader of the PA, Mahmoud Abbas. A taxi drew up, and a man got out. He introduced himself to me like this: "Hi, my name is Jamal, but you can call me Jimmy." I said, "Hi, Jimmy. Do you know where Ramallah is?" He said, "Of course I know where Ramallah is. I am Palestinian. Get in." I got in his taxi cab. In the next hour, hour and a half, Jimmy Jamal from Jerusalem gave me 65 years of Palestinian history in around 65 minutes. SubhanAllah, it was quite a taxi ride. What I remember about it, though, was that when we got through Jerusalem into the rolling hills of the Holy Land that you've seen in your dreams and in your books, that our road got bumpier the closer we got to areas called Palestinian areas, called Area C. But up on the hills was a beautiful road, like a toll road, empty and new. And I said to my driver, "Jimmy, I don't want to tell you your job, but why don't we go on that road up there? It seems to be going in the same direction." He looked at me and said, "You don't know much about this, do you?" I said, "Tell me." He said, "That road up there is for Jews only. If I, an Arab Palestinian, take you on that road, we will be shot dead in around 2 or 3 minutes." And he cheekily went to turn the wheel and said, "Shall we go on the road?" "No," I said. And a word came into my mind, and that word was apartheid. Soon we got to our first checkpoint, and I remember the Jewish American boy from the Bronx in the Israeli uniform pointing a gun at Jimmy Jamal as he took my passport for inspection. He looked at it and said, "Oh, Britain, we love you guys." For some reason, I didn't feel very proud at that moment. That night, in my hotel room in Ramallah, I cried myself to sleep. And what had I seen? I'd seen one apartheid road system and one checkpoint. And brothers and sisters, I really wish that that was as serious and as bad as the story gets for the Palestinians. But Allah had so much more to show this traveller. Now the next day, by some miracle, I don't know how, I was given an interview with Mahmoud Abbas on the day of the Palestinian elections. I mean, this was like scoop of the century. Now, in order to do an interview with a world leader on election day, you have to be escorted by their security. That makes sense, doesn't it? You can't just go up to Barack Obama on the day of the election and say, "Hey buddy, I want an interview." You have to go through his security. On my first day ever in the West Bank, I was with Mahmoud Abbas's security, who, naturally enough, were very, very tall Arabs. I remember they took me into a cement building that had bullet holes in it. I remember these two men, 6'5" and 6'8", both with guns, both with walkie-talkies, put me into an elevator made of metal. Another man took my bag, took my phone, and I was there alone. The doors of the elevator closed, they were a metal grid. And suddenly the walkie-talkie on one of the men's belts went. He lifted it up and he said what sounded to me like this. Now forgive me, that is how Arabic sounds to English ears. And I remember thinking, subtitle, "We'll kill the white woman later." Because at that moment I was terrified. I realized that I had Arabophobia, that I had absorbed every negative piece of writing that had ever been published about Arabs, about Muslims, about Palestinians, about terrorists. Of course these men wanted to kill me. They were probably Muslim and I was white. That's what Muslims do, right? I didn't know. But I have to tell you, brothers and sisters, 72 hours in Palestine is a very, very long time. And just 3 days later, after traveling around on my own, I realized I loved the people there more than I'd ever loved the people before. I'll give you an example of how this happened. The next day, I was in the center of Ramallah, and I had no coat because the Israelis had kept my bags at the airport. And an old lady, seeing me cold, it was January, came up to me and she said, "Yalla, yalla, yalla, yalla." And she just pulled my arm like this. I didn't know where she was taking me, but it happened to be her little house. She took me right into a bedroom and opened a wardrobe. And she took out a coat that was big enough for me. And then she took out a little case and she put some jumpers in the case and she closed it. She wrote in Arabic what I presumed was her name and number, and then she showed me back out onto the street with the words, "Assalamu alaikum." And I thought, what is this? What is this generosity? What is this kindness? I'd never come across anything like it in my life. When Allah has a plan for you, you can go to the left or the right, but you will go in the direction of the plan. In 2006, I went back. I wanted to see more of Palestine. I didn't know that I wanted to see more about Islam, but I knew that my heart longed to be around these generous, wonderful people again. And I'd like now, if I can, to tell you how I got my first Quran. Would you like to hear that? In 2006, I made my first visit to Gaza. It was only 2 days. I went as a reporter, and I don't remember much about it except for the return journey through Erez. This was a trip from a Nazi concentration camp style exit. There was an old lady there who was with me from 10 o'clock in the morning when I arrived. At 10 o'clock in the morning, you try to leave by Erez to get to the rest of the world, and it can take all day, or maybe you'll never get through. In fact, do you know, the Erez checkpoint if you're under 40, no Palestinian can go through it. Think about this for racial profiling. Imagine never being able to go to an airport until you're 40. You can't leave this town until you're 40 because the people in the next town and surrounding think you're a terrorist. That's Erez. So I arrived there at 10 in the morning and I called Jimmy Jamal, the driver, remember? Now, I'd only met him once on that very short drive, but I called him again because I kept his number. I said, "Hi, Jimmy, you probably don't remember me. My name's Lauren." He said, "Sister Lauren, how marvelous to hear from you. Of course, I've never forgotten you." I said, "Listen, I'm going to be getting through Erez at around 1 in the afternoon. Can you come and meet me, please?" "No problem." So I had my taxi booked, I was ready to go. But the Israelis wanted to have fun that day. The old lady ahead of us at the checkpoint in a wheelchair was booked in to have a spinal operation in America. She had a flight to catch. At 10 o'clock, she went into no man's land, an area surrounded by watchtowers and snipers. She got through to the turnstile area, which is only fit for cattle. And then an hour later, she came back crying. They said they won't let me through today. The Palestinian men with her said, no, wait, we'll try again. At midday, they tried again. The Israelis let her a little bit further in and then sent her back. And they did this for 10 hours. Until she was crying, 8 hours. Until she was crying and screaming at me, "I'm not a terrorist, why are they doing this to an old lady?" I didn't get through at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 6. It was at around 7 p.m. that I got through the checkpoint, 6 hours after Jimmy Jamal had been booked to meet me. My phone was dead. I was standing in a huge parking lot in the middle of nowhere thinking, now what? Suddenly, a car reversed up to me and a door flew open. And Jimmy Jamal stuck his head out and said, "Assalamu alaikum." I looked at him in amazement. I said, "What are you doing here?" I said, 1 o'clock. He said, "Yes, I've been waiting since 1 o'clock. I said, "You waited 6 hours?" He said, "My dear, we never leave a woman on her own." Subhanallah. When I got in the car, I cried so much, I was so hysterical, that Jimmy Jamal said, "Really, you're out of control. If you don't stop crying,